So Russia just issued a very deadly warning. De-dollarization is irreversible and is gaining momentum. And that is what Putin said during the recent BRICS Summit. His life mission today is simple: de-dollarize Russia completely. And it should be obvious why he feels that way. As part of the sanctions, Russia has been cut away from the dollar system and their dollar reserves are frozen as well. At least 100 billion have been immobilized and might be used to rebuild Ukraine, and they probably won't see their reserves again, which is a big wake-up call for Putin. Russia's economy has also been cut away from the SWIFT system. That makes it a real pain for international transactions using the reserve currency. So the motivations are clear and his desire is strong. And we're going to explore how Russia is de-dollarizing itself, the steps they are taking, and how this isn't an easy process. The US dollar today still accounts for 60% of central bank reserves. Throw in the euro at 20%, you have 80% of the world highly dependent on Western currencies. When it comes to international trade, over 60% of invoicing is done in the dollar. Together with the euro, Western currencies control over 90% of global trade. So if you want to import commodities or almost anything, you better have dollars or euros. And trying to move away from this system requires a titanic effort and the ability to endure a ton of financial pain. Most nations, even China, can't decouple completely from the dollar system. That's why Russia is such an interesting case, because they have literally no choice. At least in the short term, they have to survive without relying on either the dollar or the euro. But with the recent expansion of BRICS, de-dollarization gets easier for Russia. The addition of 6 new members, including Saudi Arabia and Argentina, gives Putin more avenues to de-dollarize his economy. When you have a bigger block of nations with both demand and supply power, it's much easier to cut reliance on the dollar system. And what we are witnessing is an extreme example of de-dollarizing a nation. It is not possible for most countries to attempt, but as we move towards a multipolar world, this will be the only playbook available. We probably won't see a full decoupling from the dollar system, but an increasing number of countries, especially in the BRICS, will start to diversify away. And to decouple from the dollar, Putin has to rebuild the Russian reserves, and it really gets simple because you're kind of boxed in. Back in April, Russia's central bank chief clearly mentioned the need to rebuild their reserves with assets that the West can't sanction away. That clearly cuts away the US dollar and the euro. There's not much point because you can't use the SWIFT system to transact anyway. And according to Russia's finance ministry, they have moved to double their yuan and gold holdings in their national wealth fund. So 60% will be in the Chinese currency and 40% will be in gold. And this is a drastic change because they will no longer hold any dollars or euros. And we can see how their reserves have evolved over time. In 2022, the majority were in Western currencies, but fast forward to today, it is mostly in gold and the yuan. And it will likely stay that way for the immediate future, and here's why. Russia holds the yuan as reserves because China is now their biggest trading partner. Since the war started, Chinese-Russian trade has exploded from virtually non-existent to over 200 billion yuan in December last year. Russia is also on the ban list for a ton of Western imports, especially for finished goods and of course technology. So Russia has to rely on China for their imports, and that means paying for goods using the yuan. But it can't keep 100% in the Chinese currency. It just doesn't make sense. Like the dollar, the yuan is still a fiat currency which loses value over time. Plus, as the Federal Reserve keeps hiking interest rates high, emerging market currencies, including the yuan, have been crashing. Over the past 12 months, the yuan is down by 5.6% against the dollar, which is more than what Chinese bond yields are offering. So Russia has to hold an asset that can store value over a long period of time. And this is where gold comes into the picture. There is no better asset for Russia that has zero counterparty risk than gold. And in a story by Bloomberg, Russia's gold hoard grew as West imposed sanctions. They increased their holdings by 1 million ounces in 12 months. And we can see this big spike from under 74 million ounces when the war broke out. Putin's going to keep buying more of their own gold supply to build up their reserves. And it's not going to stop because he literally doesn't have any other choice. Together with China, Russia is going to keep the demand for gold strong because it is sanction proof. And they are storing it deep in the vaults of Moscow. Russia is buying physical gold, guys, not some people claim to bullion stored in London or New York. And de-dollarizing your reserves is important, but you also need to diversify your trade away from dollars. And that is a harder prospect because the world still demands dollars to buy and sell stuff. But it is happening. Russia is slowly moving their trade away from the reserve currency. And back in March, the dollar lost its position as the most traded currency in Russia. The yuan ruble trade hit a high of 2 trillion, surpassing the US dollar. The Bank of Russia has been de-dollarizing their transactions, and now the private sector is starting to catch up. But that's just the appetizer. The main course is de-dollarizing the bulk of Russia's commodity trade. There's zero incentive for Putin, zero incentive to sell oil or gas in US dollars. Now, if Russia gets all their revenue in dollars, they can't possibly reinvest it back into treasury bonds, right? It will get frozen immediately, and that will be insane. And a big shout out to our sponsor, Private Internet Access. We know the importance of keeping our investments private, but are you doing the same for your data? Now, using the internet without PIA is like having your password televised to the whole world when you type. Anyone can sneak a peek and access your private accounts when you are asleep. Online browsing today is getting more and more dangerous. You don't want your identity stolen, and definitely not your financial information. And this is why having a VPN is just so useful. PIA helps to hide your IP address and encrypts your internet connection through an encrypted server. And this helps your data, your activity, and what you invest in confidential. And what's awesome is how PIA protects all your devices. It's available for Windows, macOS, or Android, and there's no limit to the number of devices you can use it on. PIA covers over 84 countries, including every state in the US, so you can access more content than ever before. Just one click and you're good to go. Best of all, PIA is risk-free. There's a 30-day back money guarantee and 24/7 customer support, so you can get started with private internet access and get an exclusive 83% discount using the link in the description below. You also enjoy 4 months for free for just being a valued subscriber to the channel, so check them out and get protected today. So the only alternative is to sell their commodities in local currencies, which is what they're doing. Just recently, Pakistan bought discounted Russian oil using the yuan. Indian refiners are also doing the same thing, paying for oil using the Chinese currency. And this is a big deal because Russia is using the Chinese yuan more and more as their own personal reserve currency. And since last year, Russia has also been selling their energy in their local currency. China has been paying Putin in rubles for Siberian gas, which is helping to prop up the currency. And the more Russia sells their commodities in a ruble, it keeps demand strong and prevents it from crashing further against the dollar. Now, this is why the BRICS expansion is going to benefit Russia, especially when it comes to de-dollarizing their commodity trade. And here's what Putin said during his address at the summit. The share of the US dollar in export and import operations within BRICS is declining. Last year, it stood at only 28.7%, and this means over 70% of trade within the bloc is done bilaterally, bypassing the dollar. So if the bloc grows, Russia has more avenues to sell commodities in local currencies, and it could be the ruble, the yuan, or even the Saudi rial. And looking at the BRICS Plus countries, we can immediately see how big their combined population is. In total, BRICS Plus represents 46% of the world, and this number will keep growing, especially with India, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And this will drive up the demand for commodities, giving Russia more avenues to de-dollarize their trade, especially if countries like Indonesia join as well. We'll see more Russian oil being bought in the different BRICS currencies. But what about within Russia itself? We have gone macro, and now it's time to go micro. And let's focus on how Russia is de-dollarizing their domestic economy. It's not enough to sell your oil in yuan or rubles. You need to convince or maybe even force your local population to drop the dollar. And this is what Putin has been doing with capital controls. And here's what that means. If you're a Russian business, you have to convert 80% of your revenue made overseas into the Russian ruble. For example, if you make 100 million euros selling steel in France, you have to convert 80 million of those euros into Russian rubles. And it doesn't matter what the exchange rate is. You need to sell those foreign currencies and buy the ruble on the open market. And this ramps up demand for the Russian currency and helps to prop up its value. It's basically capital controls, which is both good and bad. It removes the freedom of choice, but it helps the Russian economy fight against rising inflation. And another strategy Russia used was to ban foreign currency sales. They basically made it hard for local Russians to withdraw dollars or euros and transfer them abroad. The Bank of Russia restricted foreign cash withdrawals, limiting the amount to a maximum of $10,000, 10,000 US dollars. That's not a lot of money. And this discourages people from selling rubles for dollars or euros, helping to de-dollarize their local economy even further. So escaping the dollar isn't very simple. Even though Russia has been cut away from the global financial system, its own currency is still affected. As the Federal Reserve continues to hike rates, the ruble will continue to come under pressure. And over the past few months, the currency has been weakening against the dollar and recently hit 100 rubles to a single dollar before pulling back. And this isn't good because the dollar is still the benchmark for global currencies. If the ruble collapses against the dollar, it will likely drop against other currencies as well, like the Chinese yuan or the Indian rupee. Russia's inflation rate has been dropping from the high of 15% to only 2.3% in April, but it is on the rebound thanks to the stronger dollar. And the higher this goes, the higher the cost of living. So Russia's push for de-dollarization isn't really about toppling the reserve currency. It's more about protecting their economy and fighting inflation. And the faster they de-dollarize, the more resilient the Russian economy is. Now, Russia's example is very extreme. They have no choice but to shake things up. However, not every country in the world can do it. For most countries, even China, a full decoupling is impossible. And let's use Beijing as a good example. China recently cut their treasury holdings to a 14-year low. They dumped another $11 billion worth in June, taking them down to $835 billion. While this is a big dump of US bonds, they won't be able to reduce it to zero because of two glaring reasons we can't really ignore. Trade between the US and China has been increasing year after year. In 2022, America imported over $500 billion worth of stuff from China and exported at least $150 billion to Beijing. And you can bet the vast majority is transacted in dollars. So China's accumulating a huge pile of dollars every single year. And they have to put some in the US Treasury market. They have to make their money work for them. So they can't really escape the financial system. Unless America sanctions China, of course, and cuts them away from trade, Beijing won't fully decouple with the dollar system. They will keep de-risking, of course, by selling US bonds, but trying to price everything in yuan isn't really feasible. As long as countries keep trading with America, which is the world's biggest consumer, they are all locked into the dollar system one way or another. Furthermore, if America sanctions a country's bank, that country is toast. If they have a hyper-financialized economy, in a central bank survey, the dollar made up 88% of global forex transactions in April 2022. So just imagine if you're a big financial hub like Hong Kong or Shanghai and you get cut away from 88% of transactions, you are quite finished. Dollars will be pulled out from your economy, which could quite literally collapse it. So there are some realities we can't really escape from. What Russia is doing is the cold turkey treatment, but not every country can replicate it. What we'll likely see is further decoupling or de-risking from the US dollar system, and that means reducing treasury holdings and buying more gold. And that aspect of de-dollarization won't stop. Putin is essentially writing the playbook for complete decoupling. It hasn't gotten there yet, but with the new BRICS Plus, it's just a matter of time for them. Collectively, the BRICS now controls 43% of global oil production, and this changes the game when it comes to de-dollarization. As the BRICS starts pricing oil away from dollars, there will be a lesser need for dollar reserves and treasury bonds, but there will be limits to decoupling because the US economy is still extremely huge. Even India has admitted that this journey will still take a very long time. When asked about de-dollarization, the Indian oil minister had this to say: "I wish the Indian rupee would be the lead currency in the world, but I am also a realist." So here's the deal, right? While we recognize that the dollar will lose market share, we must also be realistic. It will still be a major reserve currency in tomorrow's multipolar world. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Can Russia de-dollarize their economy completely? Or is there really a limit to it? Let me know in the comments below. Stay safe, be sure to smash the like button and subscribe as we navigate through these crazy times.